Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
can
seems
see the
good.
screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me do some introduction and then I'll pass over to you, Tim.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry for the delay in setting up, technical settings. So, Assalamualaikum and good afternoon, everyone. So, good morning to Dr. Tim Brown. I would like to welcome Dr. Tim Brown from the University of Surrey, UK, to deliver a talk here in USM. He was my PhD supervisor, and I'm very grateful for him to agree to do this talk for us young lecturers and possibly postgraduate research students as well. So today, this afternoon, the title is The Art of Reviewing Journal Papers from the Perspective of an Editor-in-Chief. So some background, let me introduce Dr. Tim Brown. He is a senior lecturer in Institutes of for Communication System, Department of Electrical and Electronics Engineering in University of Surrey. So the institute is the home of the 5G, 6G Innovation Center, one of the largest and most renowned academic research center in 5G, 6G research area in the Europe. Tim is a chartered engineer, CEng with specialism in antennas propagation of radio, as well as radio circuits and system, where he has undertaken a wide variety of projects for different applications and frequency bands. Tim has led and initiated a wide range of projects, particularly in connection with novel antenna designs and their interaction with the radio environment, as well as propagation channel modeling. Research topics including land mobile satellite MIMO, compact MIMO antennas, vehicular RFID, NFC, contactless payments, ultra-wideband, and the most recent one is electromagnetic field exposure reduction. Tim's H-index is around 21 with over 1,500 citations. So both in research and teaching, Tim has had active collaborations with industry through European cooperation in science and technology, cost actions, UK research councils, as well as EU framework program 7 and 8 framework. Tim is also heavily involved in delivering professional development courses in radio, um, and which he has made many collaborations as well. So currently, Tim is the editor-in-chief of the Institution of Engineering and Technology (IET) Journal of Microwaves, Antennas, and Propagation. Okay, so I would like to hand over to you, Tim. Maybe we'll do around 45 minutes of talk,
Yeah,
and then 15 minutes at the end for Q&A.
yeah, that seems
Okay.
good. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much, Atan. Yes, and yes, I'm not sure about how true my H-index is. The funny thing about my H-index is there is many people called Tim Brown, and the Google Scholar keeps thinking I've authored more papers than I have. I keep having to correct it. So
Is it? I
I'll,
just
I
Google
can't remember
scholar and then it's like
can't remember the last time I checked it, but yes, I think more importantly, yes, we do talk about journal metrics a lot, don't we, and citation scores. But actually, I think what is more valuable is if there is a paper that people really find actually useful and it makes a good difference for the community. And
yeah,
I
true,
think that's
yeah.
very much the theme of my talk today, that I'd like to sort of share some thoughts really on what a well thought paper is about, and really hopefully just tell you sort of things that I've written down and thought, okay, from my experience over the past 20 years, these are some of the things that I've noticed that maybe you wouldn't see from, the journal maybe providing its guidance on how to review a paper, which often is very boring text, and I've never really read it myself. And I think actually it's not just that, reviewing a paper well in itself is a good thing. I think it's actually what good reviewing does for us as academics and indeed, upcoming researchers. There's probably a lot of, yes, postgraduate researchers on this call, early stage researchers. I think actually when we can learn to review papers well, it can really shape a lot of aspects of the work we do academically. And I will find by the end of my talk, I'll focus on how that does things better for us, not just in writing our own papers better. It can also help us in uh, writing proposals better in terms of how we supervise other people's research, how we support them, how we form better collegiality in our research environments. And indeed, it can actually help our teaching as well. And I think actually, I think of reviews that I have done of many papers over the years, and I think, yeah, actually, that's helping in what I tell the students about in terms of enabling the state of the art to be embedding itself in the teaching that I deliver. So there's a lot of benefits of doing it. And of course, reviewing papers is a voluntary thing. Well, I mean, some journals I've seen out there do start offering bribes, you might say. They might be giving vouchers for cheaper publications or things like that. But I don't think that those initiatives are particularly interesting. Sometimes well, a few times I suppose I've been given certificates by the IEEE. Apparently they've wanted to recognise me for excellent reviewing. I'm not one to blow my own trumpet, but I'm thankful for their appreciation.
Oh,
So
they give certificates for review.
I've probably had about 3 or 4 from them, yes, in
Oh,
the past.
interesting to know.
Yes,
Okay.
and they've put my name somewhere amongst people that they mentioned me at a conference, and people said, "Oh, I heard your name mentioned at that conference." I said, "Oh, was I? Okay." So
You're well
yes,
known
they
now.
do
Yeah.
happen. So yeah, so in terms of journal editing, I suppose journal reviewing, I suppose I'll go to the first slide. Hopefully, it will let me change slides. Yes, it does. Great. So. This is another unusual thing I do. Normally when I teach, I don't put many slides up with lots of text on them. But I thought I would do that today because I'm talking over the air. And I'm hopefully going to talk at the pace where uh, people in a country are using English, maybe as this, well, mostly as the second language. So I will slow down.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good thing to do.
Probably that's the best. Yeah, slow down, like.
And of course, having it on text probably will help a lot of people to keep following it, and I will also keep watch of the time. So, yeah, my story. Well, about 20 years ago, I started reviewing some papers. Yeah, I think I just finished my PhD about that time, and I review 1 or 2 papers, and then they get onto their database and they think, oh, this person seems happy to review papers. He seems to say yes every time. Okay, we'll ask him to review a few more papers. And so you find you get volunteered in. I think probably going back that time, I was being a bit too okay, nice. Okay, in those days, I thought, well, they've made an effort to write a paper. Let's offer them the chance to get the paper in with major revisions. Um, and I think as I did that, I saw other reviewers. You'd normally get feedback afterwards from the associate editor when they've returned the feedback to the authors. And I would find, okay, I probably should have been maybe some papers a bit more critical, and saw that my review was quite a bit different to maybe some more experienced reviewers. And I think this is the thing I want to get across today is developing that ability to have good critique, but constructive critique, and one that
Yeah.
actually helps the authors write a better paper, even if it has to be rejected. And indeed not writing an aggressive review, which I think is something that sometimes happens, and it's a very bad thing, that, and it's not one thing we want to encourage. So yeah, as I developed my ability to review, I suppose, yes, about 13 years ago, yes, one of the associate editors on IEEE transactions on antennas and propagation, yeah, he was keen to help me review more of his papers that he had, and that was good because I got to know him better that way, and he found me as a helpful reviewer, particularly where other reviewers were not so willing to write a good review. And indeed, as I got reviewing more papers for him, I found sometimes we would exchange emails, and we would really get a feel for how to evaluate papers better. So that was, I think, a good instrumental, supportive time in my academic life. And I think that's certainly something good to do, is get to know an associate editor. Maybe they will be willing to take you under their wing. That's one good starting point. And so eventually, about 7 years ago, I can't remember the exact year, I was asked to be an associate editor of IET, microwaves, antennas and propagation. And so I said yes. That didn't seem too much of a problem. They don't have a lot of papers, and it wasn't a lot of hard work. And so I took that on, and indeed, I had been reviewing papers for them before that, so I'd got to know the journal. And then about 6 years ago, yes, I think the antennas and wireless propagation letters spotted that I'd been doing this, and I'd also reviewed a lot of papers for the antennas and wireless propagation letters. They seemed to think that I was reviewing them maybe in a good way, hopefully. They asked me, and the chief editor asked me to be an associate editor. And then I took that on after consideration. And then about 4 years ago, I was asked to serve as editor-in-chief of the IET Microwaves, Antennas and Propagation Journal. I laughed when they asked me that. I thought, why on earth would they ask me? And indeed, I remember telling the chief editor of the Antennas and Wireless Propagation Letters, I wanted to check with him if he was okay with me being associate editor for that journal and also editor-in-chief of Microwaves, Antennas and Propagation. And he said to me, I'm not surprised they asked you. And he said, if you do, you say yes. I think it's better that you just do that job and don't be antennas and wireless propagation letters associate editor, because you'll need time to do the job. He said he'd be very sorry to lose me. And I didn't really want to not help him anymore. He seemed to appreciate my work. And so I decided in the end to help the community, the antennas and propagation community, that this journal really needed my help. And he understood that. And I still review for antennas and wireless propagation letters, particularly with papers. They sometimes come to me where they need a bit of help for a more constructive review on a paper that hasn't had good reviews. So I offered them that service, in a sense, to be their, if you like, consultant reviewer. And to an extent, I think I'm doing that these days as well for IEEE transactions on antennas and propagation. So even though I'm still doing this chief editor role, generally, and I will spend some of my weekends doing hobby work here in this room I'm in, where I've got lots of papers and yes, other things like our day-to-day washing and other things you may see around here if my camera is actually on. I'm not sure if it actually is. Is my camera on, by the way?
No, it's not.
Oh, it's not.
Can't see.
Oh, yes, because I thought I'd turned it on. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I should try and turn my camera on while I can.
If you can, yeah, that would be great. No, I haven't seen you for like 5 years now, so I think.
Indeed.
Yes.
And yes, because it was more that I thought I'd turned it on, but hadn't. Ah, right. Oh dear, yes. Maybe I need to, I'm sorry, slightly unshare. Oh dear, yes. Oh dear, I'm so not used to using this platform. Oh, okay. Oh, start video. that might do the job.
Uh,
Am I there?
yeah, yes, we can see
Great.
you.
Hello, everybody. Yes, sorry about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, okay. I'm so used to using Zoom. Then yes, you're seeing my screen and everything's good. So that's good. So of course, it's only 7:30 in the morning here nearly, and
7 early morning, yeah, yeah.
inevitably doing
Still
my
dark.
presentation from home, from the place I normally do my Zoom calls and things. So my colleagues will joke about what washing my household is doing today, because literally this is where I do this work, where I am doing my chief editor work, where I am doing editor, reviewing of papers. I will have lots of written paper around me, pencils, other things where I jot down ideas from what I have learnt. And yeah, I think nowadays I will literally sit here at the computer with a reading a paper and then use Microsoft Notepad editor to write down my comments and compose those carefully before I then go and fill in the reviewer form online. And this is the environment that I'm in. And I think there's something important about that I'm at home the weekend or in the evening when I am doing this chief editor work and also this hobby work, I would call it these days, reviewing papers. And it's indeed giving some of my own time, but it can be really worthwhile. There is enormous career development opportunities in it, and I think of all of the learning and the development that it's done for myself. And I really encourage making the most of doing reviewing, even though it's voluntary. One can get a lot from it. And indeed, they do come to me and they know that I can be part of the community to review papers in antennas and propagation, as I do. And then sometimes other journals, I think, yes, the IEEE Microwave Theory and Techniques, MTT journal that I mentioned there, has come along sometimes, and they find that there's something a little bit more related to antennas and propagation, and they find my reviewing service a little bit more useful to help put an angle on a paper they need reviewing. I've similarly had that kind of request with, yes, TWC, that's not my initials, that's Transactions on Wireless Communications. TCOM, I think they call it, for the Transactions on Communications. And sometimes I get requests to review IEEE Access, although I have fed back every time I've reviewed for them how loose a journal I think that is, because IEEE Access, as many know, is probably just more of a journal where you can almost publish anything that's reasonably sensible, but it's got IEEE name over it. You will pay them some money and you will get it published in 6 weeks, and it's open access, and you will hopefully get lots of citations. And that's really the way I view that journal, and that I don't always take the work that's published there seriously. However, there's sometimes papers that do get there that are interesting and useful, and yes, not worthy of publishing in an IEEE Transactions, but there can be sometimes useful information there. They might have done demonstrator on something, and that can be very useful to publish, or that there's some sets of data somebody has obtained and they can publish that in a way that's helpful for the wider readership and can be a useful reference to use. So there's certainly positive sides, as well as I think a lot of unnecessary publications that go in there. And sometimes I review what I might say more modest journals, like Progress in Electromagnetics Research. I will sometimes get the odd request to review a paper for them. And there's Electronics that sometimes come to me a few times, published by NDPI. They're quite common. They're one of the journals that seem to offer these presents for you and gifts for you if you review for them, but I don't accept any of them. It's down to whether I've give the time to do it. And I also review for conferences as well. European Conference of Antennas and Propagation Society. So I thought I'd write down, and having thought about this over the past week, what have I learned from seeing lots of reviews of papers, from doing lots of reviews of papers, seeing other people's reviews? What would I say to sort of earlier stage academics, researchers like yourselves? What would my thoughts be? And these are literally what have come out of my head, not what I've read elsewhere. This is my experience for purposes of sharing with you, hoping that that will support your career development. So first and foremost, I've mentioned this already, is wanting to give an honest, constructive critique of the work, and not an aggressive one. Sometimes I see aggressive reviews, not too often, but where I have seen them, I've needed to intervene and maybe rescind their review or edit their review, because it's not appropriate to do that. Also, it's important to be honest. Where something is not novel, where something isn't useful work, or that there's something that's not technically correct, it needs a bit more work on it. I've really wanted to give what I can to be honest and constructive in critiquing that work. And if I have to recommend or even decide as a chief editor that the paper should be rejected, I will always say at the end of this statement, any review I give, I regret that I have to decline this paper. I would have given some very clear reasons as to why that was necessary beforehand. I would evaluate whether those reviews have been done well, and if a review has been done badly, I will say so that that reviewer realizes they could review better. And where one review has been more rigorous than the other, that does show the paper isn't worthy of publication, I will state that too, in the hope that the reviewer will read that feedback and it will help develop their review, just as it did for me when I was that far ago, or that far back in my career. So these things are really important, and indeed, I've actually purposely made sure when I took over as editor-in-chief of IET Map, where we used the Scholar One, I purposely edited the default messages that go out to authors, because the default message, it says, I hope this doesn't discourage you from submitting a paper again. And I thought that's the most stupid statement, the most unkind statement, really, to somebody who's had a paper rejected. And I've made sure it's edited to be expressing regret and sorry that I've had to reject it, but they take that feedback as useful, helpful support to help them write a better paper. And that's better for them, that's better for the research community, and it's helping their career as well, to give them honest reviews. And they will do better next time. And I've had bad, reviews that for papers I've written long ago that were rejected, and I've learned to write papers better. And I don't look upon that negatively myself. So in writing a good review that's going to help the authors, I think these other points really support that as well. It's important to give a clear evaluation of the originality and the novelty, and it's really important to distinguish originality and novelty here. That yes, original means that this is a piece of work that's not been done before. Okay, we've done a new piece of work that's new, and that might be interesting to do, but is it actually useful? And novelty clearly is the important thing there in terms of what's different from originality. If it is new and also useful, have the authors really given a clear indication of how it is better than the state of the art, or how it advances knowledge in a helpful way. And a good review I usually like to see is where an introduction is written to the review that has maybe acknowledged and agreed with some statement of novelty that the authors have given, not just saying it's novel, and that or that they may not have stated it. And indeed, when I review, I think, well, the novelty I think can be acknowledged here is in this aspect. and I think that that's important in really ensuring that that's made itself clear and it's transparent. And then in meeting that novelty, it's then whether the paper is presented right to show the methodology, the technical detail that it needs to fulfill that, and that's then about the rigor. And there's rigor in the paper. There's also rigor in analysing the technical detail. So it's then looking at those figures in the paper, the equations, the technical description of those equations that we have in the next two bullet points. Is that complete? And is it really complete for understanding for the reader? Does it make total sense? Or have the authors just done it badly and confused the reviewer? If the reviewer is confused, they should be clear about that and honest about that and suggest a way to do it better. I think all of those points of support would really help things. Then it's really important to, in doing that, in my third from the bottom point there, saying play your part in the research to help them in reviewing. Sorry, I should, yeah, to help them review the paper. It's saying, okay, I'm going to give some feedback that's going to help those authors write the paper better. And what I would find really interesting in the response to the review is that rather than just authors stating the statement they always state, they always say almost after every comment, we thank the reviewer for this useful comment. They say this every time. And it's like, so what? I want to see how they've responded to the comment. Has it helped them think in a new way to help write that paper better? And indeed, that's what I do when I respond to reviewers' comments when I am correcting a paper I'm writing. And that there's really a two-way activity here. It's not just the reviewer saying, okay, I want this done, and the author does it, and the reviewer says, okay, you can accept the paper. It's being a team player with the authors. I think this is really a good aspect of reviewing. It's because you're helping them in their research. You're learning something by giving that, supportive, constructive feedback and suggesting ways in which the paper could help the community better by the way that it's presenting the research. And that it might enable them to have generated some other results that then help the paper be enhanced. And so this is then helping them, helping the wider readership, the community, because this paper then is going to get published, it's going to get read by maybe even hundreds of people. In some cases, papers can get read by thousands of people, and it's how good that paper gets will then really change things for the community by that number of people reading it. Then also it's useful sometimes for a lot of journals. You can have the option to provide some confidential comments to the editor or associate editor, and sometimes I do that, particularly if I find in the second revision that the other reviewers I think were being unfair. I will tell that to the associate editors. These things can be helpful to them. And indeed, you can point out some clear things, and sometimes I might have said, okay, I really was finding it hard to decide if to reject this paper because it was on the borderline. And the other reviewers may think different. I will say that to the associate editor. So it helps them realize that, where I was looking at that paper, and it helps them give a better evaluation of it. And it's involving more people in a decision, and it's helping the journal make a more fair decision about that paper. Also, it's very useful, and I certainly do this at the end of any review. I will give attention to minor corrections. I will also help them with proof checking where there is, and if their paper really needs a lot of proof checking, I will say, please get it proof checked, and I will give them clear indications of where there's bad English. So it'll help them do it better. Sometimes reviewers will just say, oh, the English is bad, but they don't say why. And it doesn't help the authors do that better. And so these things are all important in doing a good review. And in doing these things, it would help you anyone to know how to write a better paper, which I will be going on to later in a couple of other slides I have after this one. But I think it's useful at this time to share the stories of or examples of what cases I have seen as a bad review. I've certainly seen a lot of reviews with maybe one single line, maybe even nothing, and they just say, "Oh, this is a good paper," or "This is not novel," and they say reject. Clearly, that's not a review. Clearly, the reviewer didn't pay much attention to reading the paper, didn't want to give a lot of time to it. It didn't benefit them. It did not benefit us. It didn't benefit the author. We also get some reviews with a single line and maybe 2 or 3 very minor corrections. And that's a review that they've done, but clearly there's absolutely no rigor in that review, and so we will rate that review. And indeed, what we do is when we do look at reviews as associate editors and chief editors, we do rate the review, and we are asked to state, is that review highly relevant to the paper? Is it a sufficient review, or is it a review that is below average? And certainly we would rate below average to those 2 examples of review. And another review below average would be one with aggressive attitude. Sometimes this happens, and they do write some quite nasty statements, sometimes in capital letters. And we would rate this as a review with a vendetta. Fortunately, I have not seen too many of these. We haven't had to do anything about them, although I have to say I have been on the receiving end of this not so long ago with a paper I had authored, and the reviewers had been very aggressive, and I am of the belief that they had a vendetta against me because I was an author and I had probably rejected some of their papers as chief editor. And so they wanted to retaliate. But I think eventually the associate editors of that journal and the editors realized this. I didn't have to go and tell them, and they did not allow that reviewer to review a later revision. And so it is important to have an eye open for these kind of instances when they occur, because clearly that is not fair on the authors. And then there's also a review that can include, we get a lot of these reviews where the reviewer wants to try and promote their own work. And so they'll say, it will be good to also cite this work. And we see then that the only papers they've included are their own papers. We realize, okay, they've just done a nice review because they want to get their paper cited. And clearly we've had to edit that because the author will then know the reviewer is doing it. And this kind of conduct is something, we don't tolerate. Sometimes I do allow this to happen where I can genuinely see that the reviewer has made the author aware of wider literature in the area relevant to their work that should be cited. And they've not only shown their own work, but a number of other piece of works as well that are clearly relevant. And I will look at those technically and see, okay, is it fair that they should cite those? And then the author will not have a good idea that then that person from that paper reviewed their paper. and sometimes authors do, or reviewers do this as well. They'll find a lot of citations, and then they'll get people to cite their friends as well as themselves. There's that kind of game being played by some reviewers, and usually where that happens, we tend to spot that as well, because they haven't done a good review around it. They've focused on doing that, and then we will likewise put things right there too. And indeed, those reviewers will probably get very angry with me, and indeed they will be nasty to me when they review my papers. And this things happens, but yeah. So and also another review we have is yeah, one without justification. They'll say it's not novel, or they'll not state why. These things can be a review done too quickly. So those are things that are there. So I think in terms of developing as a reviewer, I think yeah, often it happens that when you do review a paper, you will get, as I mentioned, that eventually when all the reviews have come through, the associate editor will send the feedback to the author, and then they will usually copy it or send it separately to the reviewers for them, sending another letter of thanks for their review, and to help them see what the other reviewers said about that paper, as well as what you yourself said. I really do encourage looking at that to see if the decision turned out the same way you thought. And most of the times now, when I look at reviews I have done and I see the eventual feedback, on most occasions the conclusions were the same. And if there's another good reviewer on it, there's usually I will see that their findings matched mine, and I know then that it's helping me to ensure I have calibrated my reviewing critique against the state of the art, and that compare with others. So it's really in establishing that calibration of your reviewing of a paper as you do more reviews. And in my early days, I could see I was very uncalibrated. I was being too kind. I needed to develop this constructive criticism of reviews, and compare the detail of the review against other reviews. Yeah, and of course, and sometimes the associate editor, like the one I worked with at first, they will sometimes exchange emails with me in between papers on reviews, and indeed that is a very helpful developmental process. So getting to know an associate editor, that one day you may become an associate editor after good reviewing experience. These things are really good to do. And so, yeah, don't look at reviewing as an unpaid chore you don't want to do. And say, when you get invited, I really would encourage you to accept the invitations and grasp the opportunity, and do the reviews on time. We do get a lot of late reviews, but that will get you on the good side of the associate editors, and it will help your continuing professional development. Find the time to do it and make the time. Yes, it may mean some time at weekends. You have the time at weekends or one evening to get reviews done. And most journals won't give you too many papers to review at one time. Although, funnily enough, the IEEE TAP have given me 4 papers right now. I don't know quite why, but anyway, it happens. So, just to finish off, I think, well, what makes a good paper? I think it has to be a very clear and concise, to the point abstract. Sometimes I've seen very long abstracts or not very interesting abstracts. The abstract should whet the appetite for the reader, thinking, yes, I want to read more of this. This is interesting. It needs an expeditious introduction. This is, I think, a good word for an introduction, that it needs to talk about the state of the art, where we're at and where we need to get to. So it can really set the narrative for the paper. And that it sets the story, why we're doing this, why it's useful, and then the reader can quickly see where the novelty lies and why they've written the paper the way they have. These things are really helpful. Having technical sections that then are thought about with clear headings that make sense, that help tell the story. And also presenting the equations very clear, with clearly center aligning them, numbering them, making them neat, with clear, neat figures, diagrams, illustrating things, and graphs that are very clear. These are really important, and I know this will vary a little bit with some papers that are more, not so much in my area, in sort of communication systems area, AI or whatever. They will involve a lot of maths at first and then just some results at the end. It's really important to present that story well, as best as possible. Whereas with more practical based papers like the ones I review, it's really using good illustrations, because good illustrations can explain 1,000 words, and these things really can help. And then having a concise conclusion that is short enough, saying what's been achieved and how, where it can go to next. Some other minor things that I like to point out when writing a paper, and I think a lot of authors these days will still use double line spacing, as though that's the paper for the review. That's not normal anymore, really. It's using single line spacing, make it not very many pages, therefore fewer pages, it's easier to read. Putting the figures in the place where they should be, not at the end. We get some papers like that, where they have all of the text and all of the figures at the end, and then you have to keep reading the text, go to the figure, go to the text, go to the figure. It makes it hard to review. It's really important to think about how a reviewer is going to read your paper. Are you making it easy for them? And then making your equations nice and neat and tidy, center aligned, numbered. And one thing I really get annoyed with is italic acronyms and subscript as words. So if you see here, we've got ACC as an acronym in italic, whereas Word is, that should be not italic. It's not a variable. It looks like it's W times O times R times D, and it isn't. And some people put numbers as subscripts in italic. They shouldn't be italic. And the complex number J, my belief is it should not be italic. And certainly in my journal, I say for our branding, we do not make it italic. And indeed, because it's not a variable, it's a constant. And I know the speed of light is a variable and a constant, but what is a constant and italic, but that's a little bit different, as is E. But J is actually a number. And so there is reason I would argue to say it should not be italic. And one formula book I had read from Cambridge University Press did not make it italic either. So I go by their position. Another common thing I see in papers is you've got a section title like this, section 1, and then straight under it, it's section 1.1, a subsection title. And that really doesn't make sense. Why have 2 headings? You really need some little introduction, maybe 2 sentences to that section, because it will help the narrative of the paper. These things really help. As I've noted, yes, in the last bullet point there, having a little introduction to that section so that it tells the story better. So yeah, I think that's hopefully some useful thoughts that I've shared there. Guess I can unshare, and then that will make it easier to answer questions and things. So thanks very much. I hope that.
Thank you very much, Tim. Very simple, laid back presentation, but then very compact with all the knowledge. And I see that the editor-in-chief task role is not easy. Yeah, to monitor everything happening for that journal.
Yeah.
Is it published every quarter? This one, IT.
Oh, we publish every month, I think. Yeah, they have 12 volumes.
Every month.
Yeah.
12 volumes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That must take up quite some time. A
I
lot
only
of time,
have about,
isn't it?
I have about 600 papers a year that I handle. Yeah, I probably should have said that, shouldn't I? But yeah, so it's relatively easier. Yeah, I mean, it used to
Only
be
600. Yeah.
It used to be about 1,000, but recently, about 2 years ago, IETU, as you may have seen, had changed all of their publications to become open access, and they partnered with Wiley, The cost of article processing charges for some parts of the world became expensive, so and they didn't have partnership agreements with Wiley, so we have received less papers since then, but in some ways that's meant that people have submitted better papers as a result. So I've only had about 600 now compared to 1,000, which has been easier for me, yeah, and it allows me to still review for other journals as well. Yeah, so it was good news in one sense when they went open access from my perspective.
Yeah. Okay, there's a few questions here in the chat box, so I think I'll read up to you. First one is from Dr. Mansoor. He said, a wonderful talk by the esteemed speaker, Professor Brown. Since we have invited several MAs and PhD candidates today, so some of them might wonder what the differences are between a review and a systematic review paper. What can they do to publish a high quality systematic review paper? Could you please elaborate on this?
Yeah, right. Systematic review. Well, yes, or a systematic review of a paper, I think it means. Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, sorry. No, actually, no. I'm now understanding it. Sorry. Yes, because I've talked a lot about research contribution papers, haven't I? Rather than sort of literature review, and yes, reviewing papers where we're reviewing a topic and giving an overall review of where the research is going. Yeah, that's a good point because I've really mentioned there, haven't I? Because most of the papers we get are about a piece of research. But yes, occasionally we do get review papers come through the IET map, and indeed I've had to help recently one of my own PhD researchers write a review paper, which was quite a long one, and I'm glad we've done it now and got it done. Yeah, I think a very important thing for a review paper that we have classically seen is most of the ones I see are just a literature review of the state of the art. And they may just be writing a review of something, they might be a review of a research topic that has, I'd say, been researched for quite a long time, and they're just sort of almost saying, okay, there's this wide body of literature, and they've done a review of it. And then maybe given an indication of the different approaches that have been made in that research topic, which, okay, may be interesting, but I would not say that, and that may be useful as maybe a magazine article or something, and indeed the IEEE Antennas and Propagation magazine does sometimes make these kinds of review papers, I would say, just to look at over the history of where things have gone to help the newer people in the community learn a bit from the older people in the community. And I think certainly we get papers like that. But I think if it's going to go into a journal, I would say a review paper has to be on an important research topic where it is currently that some initial work has begun, and it has to really give clear indications of where is the work going. And I suppose this particular paper I helped my PhD candidate write, which he really wanted to write, and his other supervisor wanted him to write. I didn't particularly want him to write it. I wanted him to get on with research, if I'm totally honest. But he wanted to do it, and we helped him do it. And that was on sort of latest terahertz communication. And he was more writing that from taking other review papers that have certainly been done in that area, but it was setting new directions on where we need to do new things in terahertz, channel modeling particularly, where we can't use traditional techniques like ray tracing. There are some aspects that have been identified where there's a more need for machine learning, and it compared that against other techniques. And so if that paper is going to be successful, I'm not saying it will be or will not be, then it will hopefully be pushing the research community to explore that more. So that I would say is a good review paper. Yeah.
Okay, next one. Dear Dr. Brown, how much self-citation is acceptable in an article with, from the
That's
editorial
a
perspective?
that's a good question, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do get reviewers saying the authors appear to only have cited their own work. um, I mean, I would say yes, if the work is absolutely relevant, and if it's, if it's a development of the work you've done before, absolutely it should be cited. And we should be showing clearly how it's developed further and advanced further from that work. Yes, I think some authors might be citing other work they've done that's not relevant for the sake of getting a citation. And indeed, some paper journals do ask reviewers to say, are there inappropriate references in the paper? And actually, yeah, I think that's probably another bullet point I should have added in my slide, actually, is, sometimes I look at the literature review they've done and I'm thinking, are they actually reviewing the kind of literature they should be reviewing? And that might include some of their own work. Are they reviewing actually what's relevant to the topic? And I will then probably find citations for them and say, look, you need to be including things like this. You need to do a better literature review in these areas. And I think that would then really implicitly say what they can self-cite or not. Yeah.
Yeah, some good reviewers, they will like attach some other papers that we can refer to,
Yeah,
in their review, they will be called suggestions like
definitely.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, next one. What should authors do if they notice and can prove their paper has been reviewed unreasonably or unfairly? Is there like a channel?
I know. I have wondered about this myself. Of course, just as I described, I've been in this situation where I feel the author or the reviewer was being biased and unfair towards myself and the other authors, and that they were having a go at me because I was a chief editor of another journal, and maybe. That was particularly me because I was quite exposed being a chief editor. But this can happen as well, but because people start not getting on with each other in the research community because of maybe competition against each other. These kind of things can occur in a research community. I think the only way that it can be done these days is if the paper eventually gets rejected and the authors believe there was a bias, they can write separately to the author. They can send an appeal letter, if you like, to the editor-in-chief and say that they do believe this was the case. And that's it. And I think actually, if you tell the editor-in-chief that, rather than saying, oh, this review wasn't very good, they don't agree with the review, that's not going to help an editor-in-chief. And then they will usually be able to think, okay, was this done fairly or not? And indeed, if I get sent a letter like that, I will look at it very carefully and see if I need to reconsider it. And I should say, actually, from yes, ensuring that in evaluating whether reviews have been done well or not, and indeed the hard part of my job as an editor-in-chief is where the reviewers haven't reviewed well and the associate editor maybe hasn't looked at their reviews very well, and I've had to go and review the paper myself, and then I will give a very clear and detailed review of it in my feedback. And I always do that because, and actually, I know that doing that is probably ensuring that I'm managing things well, because I very rarely actually have authors ever write and say that they want it to be reconsidered. And sometimes some have written back because they're always unhappy when they're rejected, and I don't bother to even reply to them sometimes. But it very rarely happens. Yeah, and so I think that helps me feel again calibrated as an editor-in-chief, that they see the reviewing they get is clear. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. The next one, is it reasonable for a reviewer to reject a paper with strong justification after reading just the first two pages? For example, with reason like the paper is very poorly written with glaring language issue, and basically every line in introduction. So would you consider this an aggressive reviewer?
Good point. Yes. Sometimes I have reviewed papers where I, literally said in the confidential comments to the editor, look, this paper was what among the worst I've reviewed, and I really found it very hard to review because of their presentation. And sometimes I might find that eventually when I look into it that it's so similar to other work they've done, or it's maybe almost self-plagiarism, and that and if it's in a very bad state, I would normally give up reviewing. Quite honestly, I think those that are so bad. I mean, I do ask our associate editors to pre-screen papers, and look at papers before they send them to review, and I will sometimes suggest to the associate editor that the quality of the paper is so bad that I will return it to the authors straight away, and that it's not worthy of going to peer review. Because we want to appreciate the help of our peer reviewers. We don't want to give them papers that are awful to read, because it will discourage them, of course, from reviewing again, won't it? And sometimes if I ever do review a paper that is very bad, yes, I'll at that 2 or 3 page point, I might sort of give up and say, well, look, this isn't going to get accepted. I'm not going to go further. Yeah.
It was like
I think
really,
that's
really,
okay.
really bad, like really, really
That's
bad.
right. And giving the justification in our review that this is not appropriate, we can do that. Yeah. Because I would say probably that I would probably then say to the editor, saying, well, as a chief editor myself, I don't think this should have gone to review. Yeah, I would go that far. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes we have to be strict in order to take care of
Yeah,
our reviewers, isn't it? Yeah.
indeed. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, there's another one. Thanks, Tim, for the sharing. Sometimes when we submit the article, it is often rejected, and most of the reason will not be related to the field of the journal, even though we saw lots of related paper published in the journal. What will be what will your thoughts be on this matter in the perspective of as an editor? Is this excuse for rejection or
Yeah,
the
well,
way?
certainly we do. Yeah, I do certainly see papers that I consider to be out of scope. So when I'm reviewing for IET, when I'm getting papers submitted to the IET map, I will normally uh, refer it, because we certainly in IET we have a referral system where we can refer it to other journals, and I will state in my feedback why I consider it to be not in scope of the journal, and say specifically why. Because I get ones sometimes on radar, for example, in IET map, and sometimes the paper is too much focused on, okay, how do you process the radar pulse? I don't see a lot then relevant there to maybe RF and microwave devices, or synthesis of the array antenna that you might use in radar. If it was more to do with that, then I'd say, okay, it's suitable for this journal. I'll let it get reviewed. I can remember one occasion where I did refer one to radar, sonar, and navigation, and the chief editor there, who I know, decided, no, I think you'd better review it, and so I accepted it back again. Yes, some of that does go on. So I think if it gets referred and they say, sorry, it wasn't, can we please submit again? We can consider there. Because, sometimes it is hard to find a journal for a specific paper, because it's not obviously linked to one particular journal. But we do also have in IET the Journal of Engineering, and that usually has worked for that as well, to be a catch-all. So.
Okay, that's interesting to know. And then I think one more question. As a beginner researcher, how to handle or react when the reviewer silently asks us to cite his or her paper?
Yes, sometimes we get those where they'd say, yes, in the confidential comments, please cite. Actually, that's related to the other point earlier about self-promotion. Yes, sometimes, sometimes when I review a paper, I can think of occasions where I've said to myself, actually, something they've done that would help them would be definitely by citing and referring to one paper I'd written before. If I genuinely felt that, I would tell the associate editor in the confidential comments that I think that they should refer to one of my papers because it's so relevant to, and it would help them with what they've done. So I think if the associate editor then agrees with that, then they can then write their review and then say, well, you should refer to some of these papers, and I would include that citation if I'm on the other end, and then say, yeah. And indeed, sometimes when that happens, where the reviewer has done it in their review, I will take it out of their review and put it into my own review, so that then it's harder for the author to guess who reviewed it. And so I do these things that then, yeah, so where I think it's genuinely right that reviewer has put their publication in, and I can see by the way they've written it that's okay, then yeah, I let these things happen, and that's reasonable. Because then the author should have looked at their work first and cited it anyway. And indeed, the reviewer may find that their citation is there in the paper, and of course they may that may happen as well. That reviewers might see their citations in the paper, they then accept it because they know they're going to get a citation, but we will then say, well, the review wasn't rigorous, and that will be that. Those things flow from there. Yeah.
Unless it's very like really relevant to the paper, so then
it's okay. That's right, and it's then totally okay to say to the associate, so look, I really think they should look at this and I would and say, I'm not doing this for self-promotion, this is my thought. So yeah, that would work.
Okay, so is there any more questions from the audience? If you want to type out. We are slightly over time. Is that okay with you, Tim? Or
no problem for me. Well, we started a little bit late anyway, didn't we? About an hour ago, didn't we? So we've fitted the time okay, isn't it? And still 60 participants. I see, still keen to watch me, so this is quite encouraging.
yeah. I'm surprised as well, but yeah, that's good. Okay, if there's nothing else, I think we've answered all questions. You have also shared many interesting things from editor-in-chief perspective, and how you handle the associate editors, how you handle the reviewers and also the authors as well. So
and I've also just put my email address in the chat. If any of you got a question you want to ask after the seminar by email, feel free to.
Yeah, I think you might have put in privately to me. Okay, now I've shared with everyone. So this is Tim's email. If you have any questions to ask.
Oh, sorry, I only sent it to you, didn't I? Yeah, sorry, I should have sent it to everyone. I'll send my other one.
That's okay. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one I normally have put on all my publication papers, so people then know where to find me. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tim. I hope to keep in touch with you after this. Probably our antenna research. And thank you very much, everyone, for having to participate in this afternoon. It's very lovely to have a team here, Dr. Tim Brown from University of Surrey, UK, where it's famous for its one of it is a satellite, and also 6G, the next generation 6G research center. Okay, thank you very much. If you have the CPD link here, is the new one is given here for you to log in your attendance and get your CPD points. And again, thank you very much, everyone. I wish you a good day, and thank you.
Yeah, and happy reviewing. Thank you very much.
Happy reviewing, yeah.
Have a lovely day.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks so much.